video presentation is a celebration of Ontario's centennial year. Ontario is the fulfillment of a dream had by two brothers, a dream that has endured for a century. Ontario was incorporated 100 years ago on December 10, 1891. Population 550, covering about 1/2 square mile. Today, Ontario has more than 135,000 people living within a 37 square mile area. During this presentation, you'll learn about some significant people and events associated with the growth of Ontario from a model colony to a model city.
The living history of Ontario is the story of people of all races and cultures who created out of the land a society rich in diversity. Native American Indians, colonizing Spaniards, the Anglo-Saxons, and the pioneer settlers of other nationalities would form a multicultural California. A great social experiment began in 1821 when Mexico won independence from Spain. While the power of the Franciscan missionaries weakened, the colonization of California territory continued. Under the flag of Mexico, rights to vast land holdings called rancho grants were issued to leading citizens. During the ranchero period, agriculture flourished, due in large part to the Indians' labor. In 1839, Tiburcio Tapia was awarded a land grant by Mexican Governor Juan Alvarado that included Ontario, Upland, Cucamonga, and Etiwanda. The land passed to Tapia's descendants and was eventually controlled by John Raines until his death in 1862. The rancho deteriorated and was broken up in 1871. The war between Mexico and the United States ended in 1848, and California was admitted to the Union in 1850. Captain J.S. Garcia, a retired seaman, acquired portions of Tapia's rancho and would soon do business with the founders of a model colony to be named Ontario. After the Civil War, the completion of the Southern Pacific opened the western frontier to America. A man inspired by irrigation had a dream for a city in the sagebrush that he would call Ontario. Ontario's genesis was a dream of Canadian-born engineer George Chaffee. With America migrating westward, new towns were needed. On not much more than a sloping desert, he envisioned a plan for the new settlement in 1882.
From the plateau at the foot of the mountain, I obtained a bird's-eye view of the whole area I proposed to acquire. And while I was standing there looking at it, I saw what Ontario was to and did become. I got my surveyor, and the thing was underway. George Chaffee.
George Chaffee had some real plans for his new colony. Each lot sold would have water for irrigation. He would build an agricultural college for the education of his new settlers. And he planned a broad avenue, 200 feet wide and 7 miles long, reaching from the Southern Pacific Railroad tracks all the way to the foothills of Mount San Antonio.
Electric lights would be placed every quarter mile on the avenue. of sufficient illuminating power to effectually light the entire settlement. And because Chaffee was a Victorian, there would be no sale or consumption of alcoholic beverages. With land surveyed and maps drawn, and with the help of his brother William, land was advertised for sale.
The Chaffee brothers formed the San Antonio Water Company with Judge R.M. Whitney and their old friend Luther Holt from Riverside on the board of directors. And then what they did was essentially cut a deal with themselves. All perfectly legal. They're smart boys.
The first sale went to Leroy S. Dyer.
On a bright day in November 1882, 3 gentlemen alighted from the Southern Pacific train at the old Cucamonga station. And mounting the mail wagon, were driven up past the post office kept in the little old store and saloon near the Cucamonga winery, and over the Chaffee brothers' headquarters on 14th Street, a little cottage. This and one little house at Stoll's Pipe Camp being the only building on the mesa between Cucamonga and Pomona. Leroy Dyer.
Isaac Whitaker was the first one to build a house on his land. He was the first one to plant an orange tree, and he's the first one to bring his wife with him, once he found his land.
While all the streets were staked out, the streets could not be seen for the brush, and Mr. Whitaker was up against it when it came to finding his 10 acres. It was here that the first domicile in the shape of a tent was erected, the Daily Republican.
Miss Eleanor Freeman, a well-traveled teacher fond of hats she bought in Paris, was one of the first landowners and builders in the new colony. Always civic-minded, she actively raised money for charities, wrote poetry for cultural events, and donated space in her Ohio block building for the first public library. She could often be seen perusing the town, prim and proper in her long skirts, replete with bustles and panniers. In 1882, the nearest train stop was Cucamonga, 4 miles away, and the Chaffees transported people to Ontario via horse and carriage.
The Chaffees had made arrangements with the Southern Pacific for travel. A man had only to wave his hat and the train would slack up and take him on. Eleanor Freeman.
Later, a red flag would be used. Trains were ordered to stop in 1883. Also in 1883, George Chaffee built a hotel next to the railway.
This hotel is fitted up in a style to compare with the best hotels in Southern California. Tourists and travelers, and those who are seeking homes in California, will find this a good place to stop as headquarters. R.M. Whitney.
Chaffee strung the country's first long-distance telephone line between the hotel and Etowanda, 14 miles away. He also planted 4 rows of trees along his magnificent 7-mile avenue.
The determination of the name Euclid Avenue was a personal thing altogether. When I was in grammar school, I took the head of the class in geometry. Euclid was my favorite, so that was how it was named. George Chaffee.
Chaffee built a fountain between the hotel and the railway. He had to show everybody that there was an abundance of water. So before the train came into the station, he'd turn the water on. Then after the train left, he'd turn the water off. It was just another way of advertising.
Also in 1883, a gala celebration was planned for the laying of the cornerstone at the Chaffee College of Agriculture. Crucial to agriculture in Ontario was water. The surface water from San Antonio Canyon was divided equally, half going to Pomona and half going to Ontario. and was carried either in flumes or in concrete-lined ditches. From there, the water was distributed to each lot once a month via cement pipes. But to meet the irrigation needs of his colony, Chaffee needed more water, which lay beneath the surface. Tunneling was dangerous, but the expertise of the Chinese, who helped build the Transcontinental Railroad, made the project feasible. Early in 1885, a delegation from Australia's Royal Commission on Water Supply and Irrigation visited William Chaffee, where they were quite impressed with the waterworks. The first public school opened in 1884 in the attic of McIntyre's carpenter shop. Jamie Case taught 14 pupils. It later moved to an adobe. Though the Ontario Electric Company was originally established in 1885 to light Euclid Avenue and power the electric cars, engineers had trouble sending the current from the powerhouse on San Antonio Creek to the town site. Electric lights were used for the first and only time in 1885 at the hotel. However, these were powered by a dynamo invented by George Chaffee. Also in 1885, E.P. Clark took it upon himself to publish the Ontario Record. The young newspaperman would later be the driving force behind Ontario's incorporation into a city. The paper would last until 1965. The Australian delegation must have impressed the Chaffees as well. The brothers sold all holdings, and George moved to Australia in January 1886. William stayed until November and was given a farewell party by 150 persons from Ontario. No one from the new Ontario Land Company came.
The Chaffees sold all they had for a profit of $25,000. Their Australian venture turned into a financial disaster for them. But William managed to stay on, and he introduced the dried fruit industry there. He was the first mayor of Mildura, and they erected a statue in his honor there. George lost everything and came back to the United States in 1897 on borrowed funds.
With the completion of the Santa Fe Railroad, competition was as hot as steam. Rates dropped overnight, and at one point, a ticket from Los Angeles to Chicago was $2. Persons wanting to go to Colton could buy a ticket to Kansas City for $1 and just get off in Colton, beating the regular higher fare.
What the rate war did was give lots of people the opportunity to see what was in the West. Primarily land, and lots of it.
Everything seemed to give promise to an unexampled period of prosperity for this child of the desert, Eleanor Freeman.
The new Ontario Land and Improvement Company took over immediately, under the management of Charles Frankish, an orange grove owner from Riverside. Frankish created a park with a larger fountain next to the hotel and planted more trees. The great land boom was about to explode. In October 1886, phones were installed in Henry J. Rose's drugstore with a sign bearing the legend, Public Telephone Station. For some, it was too public, causing them to write letters instead. But Frankish and the land company were slow about fulfilling Chaffee's promises to the people of Ontario. E.P. Clark, the editor of the Ontario Record, voiced the impatience of the community.
Our telegraphic facilities being first class, we have scarcely felt the want of the telephone. Now all that is wanted is the electric railway and the electric light. E.P. Clark.
Again, I want to tell you how much I regard the reputation of the Chaffee brothers. Their engineering with water, their surveying, their know-how, which now you have many educated people, engineers doing all that. They did it by the seat of their pants, and they did it well.
The land boom extended into 1887, and people continued to build in Ontario including Abraham Oakley, a bootmaker and fruit grower.
The house that I live in was built in 1887 and is known as the Oakley House. Mr. Oakley had a boot and shoe store on the corner of A and Euclid Avenue. I love this old house. My family and I have lived here for a long time in this house, and it has a lot of history of Ontario in it. I wish more children could enjoy the history of Ontario.
The Central School building opened on Sultana and G Streets. A new bell commemorated the event. By this time, the Congregationalists, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, and the Presbyterians had all erected churches in Ontario. Ontario's first Justice of the Peace was Judge Holbrook, whose first jury trial involved an employee and wages.
The trial was held in the carriage repository, with a crowd of interested spectators occupying the seats of the carriages. Charles Frankish.
Debate over water bubbled up in October 1887. Incorporation was on the minds of citizens. The first meeting was held with E.P. Clark, Dr. Edmund Bedford, owner of the Magnolia Villa in North Ontario, store owner D.T. Jones, later to become Ontario's first mayor, and Judge Holbrook attending. Enthusiasm for continuing the prohibition of saloons was expressed. They organized a petition for incorporation. But on December 10, 1887, the wind started to blow. The second story of Rose's drugstore sailed onto the lot next to it, fully intact.
For every well-built edifice in the town stood the storm, without damage. Eleanor Freeman.
The windstorms of 1887 were foreshadows of trouble in 1888. The Bedford Brothers Magnolia tract went on sale, but sales slumped. The riches of the land boom dried up after 2 years, concurrent with the severe drought of 1888. In those days, water was as precious as gold. Without water, Ontario would perish. Incorporation was defeated in 1888 after a bitter battle. 3 days before the vote, the land company formed the Ontario Observer, a newspaper to compete with E.P. Clark's Ontario Record. As a conciliatory measure, the land company formed a property owners association.
Its purpose is to create a feeling of confidence between all who are earnestly seeking mutual cooperation. Charles Frankish.
1 month later, Frankish foreclosed on the Bedford Brothers Magnolia Villa project.
My great-grandfather, Charles Frankish, came to Ontario in 1886 from Riverside, where he had moved 2 years previously from Canada. He came here and was the manager of the Ontario Land Development Company that took over the interests of the Chaffee brothers. When I was quite a young girl, my grandmother told me of an experience she had when she was only 8 years old, when she rode on the trolley, the mule car trolley, up Euclid Avenue on the very first trip after her father, Charles Frankish, had finished and made it possible for the trip, which took an hour, and then it took 20 minutes to come back down. I guess on the first trip, the mules didn't ride on the back, but my grandmother, who I called Gram, said that later on they did, and she enjoyed many trips on that trolley.
In 1888, tracks were laid up the center of Euclid Avenue by the Ontario and San Antonio Heights Railway Company. However, the land company found it difficult to employ a contractor to electrify the system. Judge R.M. Whitney solved the problem. Whitney had the first street railroad franchise in Los Angeles in 1869. His cars were pulled by mules. So, 2 mules were employed to pull a car up the 1,000-foot rise. Once at the top, the mules climbed onto a platform, invented by J.B. Tays, that slid from under the car, and then the mules rode down the hill with the rest of the passengers. For at least 7 years, the mules did their work.
What happened to the mules? Legend has it that at least one of them made its way to the farmer's field. The farmer hitched the mule to the plow at the lower end of the field. Up the hill the mule went, pulling the plow all the way to the top of the furrow. The farmer turned the mule around, but back the mule would not walk. The mule was accustomed to riding downhill on the platform on the back of the mule car, dozing along the way. Perhaps it was nap time. The farmer sold the mule the next day.
Discussion over water between the townspeople and the Land and Improvement Company reached the boiling point in 1889. These feelings were expressed in the settler's letter on the town water system to the editor of the Ontario Record in July. The letter outlined the Chaffee brothers' promises regarding water and how those promises had been broken by the Ontario Land Company. Charles Frankish responded on July 27th in his paper, the Ontario Observer.
I see that the editor of the Record is still in his chronic condition of doubt and suspicion. What a good thing it would be for the public if some lady could find a soft place in his heart and thus create a kind of safety valve to relieve his brain. Oh, what a pity it is that he cannot devise some carefully masked scheme to appropriate a little brain from someone. Charles Frankish.
The editor of the Ontario Record rebutted 3 days later.
The Record is published to represent the interests of the public. If the gentlemanly manager of the land company and our esteemed contemporary find such coarse attacks in harmony with their standards of journalistic decency, we are entirely willing that they should have a monopoly of the business. Certainly, we should consider it disgraceful, even for an insane man, to descend into the arena of mudslinging, such as that in which Mr. Frankish seems so readily to find his proper sphere. If we are to have less water, the more we pay for it, there will be some lively kicking done. E.P. Clark.
Shortly after that editorial, Charles Frankish canceled advertising in the Ontario Record for his 2 clothing stores. In 1890, Chaffee College graduated its first class, and the population of the Ontario colony reached 683. In 1891, Ontario received the prize for lemons at the Citrus Fair in Los Angeles. Citrus of all kinds were displayed on a now world-famous mule car, but horses, instead of mules, were used in the exhibition. Meanwhile, at home, residents of the colony suspected that water was being wasted somewhere. Fraud was mentioned publicly for the first time. The move for incorporation was as ripe as the citrus in the orchards. In 1891, the colony of Ontario added 39 persons to its population, to bring the total to 722. The dream of the Chaffee brothers to see the desert colony of Ontario flourish now rested with its people. Water was still the vital element required for the growth of the orchards and the survival of the settlement. The pioneers living there grew tired of not getting their fair share of the water. For some farmers used more than their allotted amount, watering their orchard secretly to escape detection.
On October 13, 1891, the Board of Trade was created by J.D. Moulton and C.W. Eldridge to fight for incorporation. On November 21st, the men of the colony voted. Women had not yet secured their right to vote. Certification was filed with the Secretary of State of California, and on December 10, 1891, Ontario became a town, encompassing an area less than 1 square mile. On December 22nd, D.T. Jones was elected president of the Board of Trustees and would be Ontario's first mayor. In 1892, water and other municipal issues were now in the hands of the citizens of Ontario.
In 1893, the Ontario Fruit Exchange formed to deal with problems of marketing. It was the first citrus fruit marketing co-op in the region. The largest fruit shipment left Ontario on November 4th for Cedar Rapids, Iowa. 17 cars decorated with flowers and palm leaves held 408,000 pounds of fruit. People cheered and a band played as the train departed the station.
What started for Clifford Graber and his brother Charles as a hobby became a lucrative business in 1894. Today, the Graber Olive House still stands in its original 4th Street location, making it the oldest Ontario business still in existence.
My father came to California in 1892 as a young man and started as a hobby to pick olives and cure olives for home use. Now, these olives turned out so well that the neighbors liked them so well. The next year he did more, and the neighbors raved about him so, and they just told him he should sell them to the store, which he did. Started selling them to the store in barrels, and the people would dip out whatever they wanted, buy them by the pint. Well, the secret of this success and popularity of the olive is due to this fine quality. And fine quality is due to the picking the olive fully tree ripened. That is when the color is pink to deep red in color. Commercially, the canned olives, black olives that you get are picked green and oxidized black. And that's the only way the large industry can handle them in large quantities. But we used the process my dad developed, which is slow and it's easy on the olive, and so we end up with a very superior quality fruit. And actually, the Graber olive has been almost world famous, not in quantity, but in quality. And and during this period, at meetings with the other olive producers and packers, they would ask my dad, Cliff, why don't you oxidize your olives black like we do? Of course, Cliff would never do that, so they got to call him the fussy old man of the olive business.
1895 saw the formation of the Ontario Electric Company and the lighting of Euclid Avenue, 10 years after George Chafee's promise. Electrical power replaced mule power operating the cars in September. But a burst water pipe that destroyed the generator necessitated the mule's return until it could be repaired. Earl Richardson was employed to repair the damage. He also invented many electrical appliances, his most famous being the hot point iron, so his wife could get the ruffles on her daughter's dress crisp. Around that time, Ontario got its first Wild West excitement. 2 robbers blackjacked Fred Stamp, the cashier at the Ontario State Bank, over the head, locked him in the vault, and got off with about $4,500.
My great-grandfather, Godfrey T. Stam, came to the Ontario area in approximately 1880 and became part of the Ontario Land Company. He brought with him his sons George Theodore, and he brought with him his son Fred. The legend in the family is the famous bank robbery, which is a legend in Ontario and occurred approximately 1898. It happened in the Ontario State Bank building at the corner of State Street and Euclid Avenue. The basis of it was 2 men came in and held up my Uncle Fred and locked him in the safe. And no one else was around to get him out. So somebody took off on horseback and headed up to the top of Euclid Avenue, where my grandfather, George, was busy working in the San Antonio water tunnels. George then decided that the quickest way down, because the mule car was at the top, was to stick the mules on the back of the car and open throttle and let it go. No brakes. Inside the car were 2 Quaker ladies who made the trip with him and had the ride of their life at that time. The trip was made in approximately 7 minutes and at a speed of between 55 and 60 miles an hour. When he got back down here to the end of the line, he went into the bank, and fortunately Fred had been able to give instructions on the combination by yelling through the safe, and was safe at that point.
Nathaniel Kletzing, a preacher just having arrived by train, tells of first-day impressions in his diary of 1896.
Just arriving to Ontario by train. Met by H.K. Shields. Henry took us out to see the town. a beautiful town. Orange groves with trees, laden with the golden fruit. We'll be pleased with the place.
Late in 1900, east of Ontario, Secondo Guasti founded the Italian Vineyard Company, established a village and planted nearly 5,000 acres of vines.
The success of the wine and grape business here in Ontario and in this valley, I think, was due to two things. There was an increasing demand in the United States for wine, and then there were excellent growing conditions here in the Cucamonga Valley. Originally in the valley in the mid-1800s, around 1860, there was a feeling that you couldn't grow non-irrigated fruit crops in this valley. Two fellows, Haven and Milliken, who the streets were later named, decided they'd try wine grapes. They were highly successful with them. Other vineyards went in after that. The industry obviously has had its ups and downs, as any industry does as it goes through time. Prohibition was a very interesting time because there would be no more wine manufactured. A lot of the fellows thought that they would go bankrupt. As it turned out, at that time, there was such a demand on the East Coast for grapes for people to make their own wine that some of the biggest fortunes were made in the valley during Prohibition.
In 1901, Ontario annexed areas of land that contained large citrus holdings, but few voters. After adding a section of North Ontario, so named by the Santa Fe Railroad, that contained the railway and the post office, the Uplanders, as they called themselves, took action. In 1902, fearful that Ontario would encroach upon more land, the Uplanders changed the name to Upland, and in 1906 filed for incorporation. Boundary protest continued for 30 years, but Upland's incorporation successfully stopped Ontario's northern expansion.
Though Upland possessed more acres of land, Ontario's population was greater, and the spirit of Ontario's people and the foundation of its industry set the stage in the 20th century for this western town to become the pride of the desert.
The Pacific Electric Heating Company was founded by Earl Richardson to manufacture electric irons and other household appliances. Ontario published its first daily paper, the Daily Republican. Later, Crombie Allen purchased it and the Ontario Record and changed the name to the Daily Report. Sunkist products became a household word, due in part to the quality of fruit raised and harvested in Ontario. In 1903, the Los Angeles-Salt Lake City Railroad, which linked those two cities, steamed into town, creating more noise and causing more disturbances than the new century had already created. 6 months earlier, Ordinance 116 passed, prohibiting target practice or the firing of explosives because it was likely to scare horses in the city. Property costing $800 was purchased at Euclid Avenue and D Street for the new city library. The year before, the library board drafted a letter to Andrew Carnegie requesting funds to construct a new building. With the letter posted and the land purchased, all they could do was wait.
In 1904, Armstrong Nurseries moved to the corner of Euclid and D Street. For years since its beginning, in the 1890s, John Armstrong provided farmers with eucalyptus trees for windbreaks, and later added citrus and other fruit trees.
My family really pioneered the business of the nursery catalog. They started the first one in 1902, and in the 20s and the 30s, they added pictures and descriptions, and there were no others around like that at the time. In 1935, my father, Audrey Armstrong, started the rose breeding program at Armstrong Nurseries, and they developed all kinds of internationally known roses, one of which was a Charlotte Armstrong rose named after my grandmother, and now the official flower of Ontario.
In 1904, an ordinance passed prohibiting gambling in roughhouses in order to cut down on the rowdy and boisterous behavior of workers. But the workers weren't the only nuisance. In 1905, a law was enacted that prohibited keeping swine within city limits.
In 1906, a communication was received from Andrew Carnegie, expressing his desire to contribute $10,000 for the construction of a new library. And a year later, the Carnegie Library was dedicated.
Founded on Victorian principles of discipline and demeanor, drinking had always been prohibited in Ontario. So, in 1908, to provide refreshment to the citizens of Ontario, the Women's Christian Temperance Union erected a fountain on Euclid Avenue. Today, the same fountain can be found very close to its original site. With the town growing and business expanding, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce was organized in 1909.
The purpose of the Ontario Chamber at its inception was to promote land sales of agricultural lands and to draw industrial companies to the area. In this centennial year, the purpose of our chamber hasn't actually changed. However, the activities necessary to promote that purpose have been greatly expanded.
In 1910, the population of Ontario grew to 4,274, and the speed limit in the town was raised from 14 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour.
The town purchased the old Ontario Country Club building to use as a town hall for $10,000. This was a vast improvement over the basement of the library for meetings of the town board. Town attorney T.E. Park drafted a law prohibiting the exhibition of pictures depicting prize fights, holdups, robberies, or any other picture demoralizing to youth. A year later, the playing of pool or billiards on Sundays was prohibited.
With the larger population, Ontario qualified for and officially changed its name to the City of Ontario in 1911.
1914 witnessed the roadsters of the Western automobile races roar through Ontario. And in 1915, the Casablanca Hotel opened its doors to the public. Chaffee Junior College was founded in 1916 on the same campus where Chaffee Union High School held classes. 53 students enrolled the first year.
In 1918, Earl Richardson's company, now named the Hot Point Electric Company, after its successful iron, merged with General Electric and expanded its business from Ontario.
In June 1919, Ontario's first landing strip, Bryant Field, was graded, and 1 week later, returning planes touched down in the welcome home celebration of World War I veterans. Ontario's contribution to the war effort was in the form of peach pits. Charcoal for gas masks made from the pits proved to be the best material yet discovered and was used in masks that Allied troops depended upon in the trenches of Europe. Perhaps the gas mask could have been used in Ontario because in 1921, the Board of Health issued permits to board billy goats within the city limits. Hal Halstead, now 103 years of age, recalls working the city water pumps.
Well, out of Rowan, I believe was city manager. And I worked night shift running the pumps out on 4th Street. Walked to work and put in 12 hours, 7 days a week.
In April of the same year, the Ontario Aircraft Corporation got off the ground with the help of the Ontario Airman, Walter Waterman. In July 1923, Latimer Field was established, only the second municipal airport in Southern California. Waterman was named manager. Later that month, Ontario's first biplane, a JN-4, or Ginny, as it was more well known, lifted into the air, piloted by Waterman, named Miss Ontario. The word Ontario was painted on the underside of the wings to advertise the newest member of the aviation network. In April 1924, the Ontario Big Bear Airline was founded. With its 10 new Boeing flying boats, Ontario boasted of more airplanes per capita than any U.S. city. The airline, however, was ill-fated.
My mother and dad came to Ontario from
Vancouver, Canada in 1917 by train. Now, one of the interesting stories that Dad told was the time the waterman, Waldo Waterman, was establishing an airplane flight from Ontario to Big Bear Lake. And on the first flight, in which Dad was supposed to go, but he didn't, the airplane fell in the lake. Just came in a little short of the runway.
Also during the 20s, Segundo Guasti's Villa hosted a number of the famous and the infamous. Among the guests were A.P. Giannini, founder of the Bank of Italia and the Bank of America. Fascist leader Benito Mussolini, Il Duce, also enjoyed 2 weeks of California wine and Italian hospitality in the Guasti's executive house. In 1925, 4th Street Park, later named John Galvin Park, was dedicated. In 1926, the fruit industry got a boost when Exchange Orange Products announced its move to Ontario. Plans included construction of a $150,000 factory. In 1958, the name was officially changed to Sunkist, even though citrus packaged in Ontario bore the label for more than 30 years.
In 1927, the Ontario Board of Trustees changed its title to City Council. The next year saw a lot of changes in Ontario as well. A new 30-acre airport was dedicated near the site it occupies today, as was the new Daily Report building on East B Street.
My family came to Ontario in October of 1927. We moved in our house on the 27th. And one of the things I remember about downtown is it was such a pretty little town. One of our favorite places to eat was the Ford Lunch. And one of the things I remember that was so good, especially, was their corned beef.
An era drew to a close, and a new one began when buses replaced the electric rail cars on Euclid Avenue, 40 years after it was first laid. Pacific Electric crews began tearing up and dismantling the rail system that stretched between the majestic trees of Euclid Avenue.
The Ontario population in 1930 increased to 13,582, but so did the noise level. So disturbing was the crowing of roosters in the mornings, a police commission was formed to effectively deal with the problem. The commission scratched and pecked at solutions, but unable to suppress the obnoxious cock-a-doodle-doing, finally turned a deaf ear to the matter. However, the use of orchard heaters was outlawed, and speed limits were raised to 20 miles per hour.
In the 1932 Olympic trials, a new pole vault record was set by Bill Graber, son of Clifford Graber. He made the team and went on to compete in the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles. In the mid-30s, a new city hall was constructed on Euclid Avenue as part of a WPA project. And Ontario got its first dial telephones when the telephone company dedicated its new building. The Depression of the 30s, along with the sad parade of Dust Bowl immigrants, taxed the resources available in Ontario. Feelings towards Mexican immigrant laborers changed with so many Americans looking for work.
Back in the 30s, during the Depression, it was real hard for us, the Mexican American that lived south of the railroad tracks in Ontario, because they couldn't find any jobs. And the jobs that they did have before, they were taken away from them, from the people that came from the Middle West. And even my father had a heck of a time trying to find anything for us to eat. But things start changing back in the 40s when they start inducting the young man into the service. And my cousins, my uncles, a lot of people went into the service at that time, and then things start changing a little better for us. And they were Americans.
On May 20th, 1939, a bright, momentous event took place. The first annual All-States picnic was celebrated on Euclid Avenue. A picnic table over a mile long held places for 30,000 people from every state in the Union that attended. The unique affair was even recorded in Ripley's Believe It or Not.
The false sense of peace that pervaded the country manifested itself in Ontario as the Chaffee Art Association organized in 1941. However, in 1942, after the declaration of war on Hitler and Hirohito, the cannon in front of the old City Hall was donated to the Army to be melted down for bullets. In that same year, the new Ontario Municipal Airport opened, as a military plane made the first landing on the modern runways. A year later, in 1943, the U.S. Army Air Corps leased Ontario Airfield as a training base for P-38s. In the war effort, the Frankish building hosted USO recreational activities. But far removed from the blitzkrieg and the noises of war, citizen complaints continued about crowing roosters within the city limits.
During the war, the concerns that flooded the thoughts of early pioneers, water and survival, seemed far away and distant. But survival of another sort would soon taunt the city, the survival of its industry.
With the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, World War II drew to a close, and Ontario readied itself for the post-war boom. While most people settled into a routine, dramatic changes in the next few years would impact industry, transportation, and jobs, and would reshape the face of the city for years to come. In 1946, Pacific Overseas Airlines, an international air cargo service with a fleet of DC-3s, started flying out of Ontario to the South Pacific. With the municipal airfield now handling international traffic, the city renamed it Ontario International Airport.
After the war, student enrollment was larger than ever at the combined campuses of Chaffee Union High School and Chaffee College.
The Ontario Oreos started workouts in 1947. Their Sunset League opener pitted this 19-man team against Riverside in April. Ontario joined the community of broadcasting in 1947 when KOCS AM and FM went on the air for the first time from Chaffee Auditorium and their nearby studio.
The city's population exploded to 22,872 following World War II. In 1950, smudge pots were banned from use in residential and commercial areas of the city due to heavy air pollution.
The California National Guard constructed and dedicated a new armory at John Galvin Park, located at 4th and Grove in that same year. Prior to that, they assembled at Chaffee College. 2 years later, the 196 Fighter Group of the California Air National Guard based themselves at Ontario International Airport and later extended the runways to accommodate their F-86 Sabercats.
In the early 50s, two closures rocked Ontario. When the Ontario Cucamonga Fruit Exchange locked its doors in 1951, it marked the beginning of the decline for the fruit industry in Ontario. What had begun as the lifeblood of Ontario was slowly drained by the need and development of affordable housing, which replaced orchards by the acre. With decreasing industry and related businesses, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce also locked its doors.
But while one industry shriveled, another blossomed. Direct air mail arrived at Ontario International Airport in 1951. And in 1952, Lockheed Aircraft Service erected the first of 3 hangars and led the way for several companies, including General Electric, to establish themselves in Ontario. More industry meant more jobs and increased growth.
Air travel was taking place at Ontario, but in the late 1950s, freeways were the new trend. An ocean-to-ocean highway that incorporated Holt Boulevard was planned, but fell through. However, Route 66, originating at Santa Monica and continuing cross-country eastward, was an unqualified success.
We, the Kusher family, founded Vince's Spaghetti in September of 1945. This area was all orange groves at the time. This was a very brisk thoroughfare from Los Angeles to Palm Springs. It was Holt Avenue, but was also Highway 99. We had locals and people, all the movie stars, not all the movie stars, but a few movie stars who stopped in and were our customers. With the completion of Interstate 10 freeway, there was a great impact on the businesses on Holt Boulevard. So many of these businesses had to close down.
Interstate 10, originally called the Ramona Freeway in the early 50s, but later renamed the San Bernardino Freeway, passed along the north side of the city. I-10 carried new resources to Ontario and made the drive to Los Angeles in 1957 a delightful 40 minutes. When exiting at Euclid Avenue, motorists experienced the panorama of Ontario's majestic trees and a spectacular view of Mount Baldy.
The now controversial Christmas tablets that grace Euclid Avenue were not so controversial when they were erected in 1959.
We formed a committee to put Christ back into Christmas. This was made up of businessmen and private citizens in the community, the idea being to create a series of 12 scenes on Euclid Avenue depicting the life of Christ. I fail to see the controversy involving this, since the scenes were paid for, were purchased by businessmen, service clubs, and individuals in the community. I see it no conflict between church and state.
By 1960, Ontario's population had more than doubled to 46,617. With the increase of residents came an increase of students. So in 1960, Chaffey College moved to its new expansive campus in Altaloma. In January of 1961, the new library at Lemon and C Streets was dedicated.
Money was the problem for Ontario International Airport. There wasn't enough of it. So in 1967, Ontario reached an agreement with Los Angeles International, giving it control of operations. A year later, the first jet passenger service reached Ontario as Pacific Southwest Airlines, better known as PSA, blasted into the air. While the noise was deafening to some residents, it was nothing compared to the noise that would soon emanate from across the freeway. Groundbreaking ceremonies took place for the Ontario Motor Speedway in 1968.
And so far, Lady Luck is riding with him. The first 5 are Lloyd Ruby.
Gentlemen, start your engine.
The noise was different, but just as thunderous when the Ontario Motor Speedway hosted California Jam in 1974. Over 200,000 attended the concert, featuring numerous rock groups, including the Eagles, Earth, Wind and Fire, Seals and Crofts, and Black Sabbath. The event lasted 12 hours. A year earlier, the City of Ontario annexed the old Guasti property, including the historic church, which was peacefully situated between Ontario International Airport and Ontario Motor Speedway.
City Hall expanded and moved into its new building on East B Street in 1979. The Museum of History and Art opened the same year in the old City Hall building at Euclid Avenue and Holt Street.
We interpret some of the highlights of Ontario's history, including the early citrus industry, local businesses like Graber Olives and Armstrong Nurseries, and the importance of the General Electric Hot Point plant here in Ontario.
The 80s opened with 88,820 living in Ontario. Financial problems closed Ontario Motor Speedway after 10 years of checkered flags and tumultuous excitement. The bricks from the winner's circle were moved to the City Hall. Chevron Land and Development purchased the property from the newly planned International Center, now known as the Ontario Center. Another era closed when the General Electric Hot Point Iron Company pulled the plug.
The fountain placed on Euclid Avenue by Charles Frankish in the late 1800s was moved to the Museum of History in 1983 to make way for the Euclid Avenue underpass. The underpass was dedicated a year later and did a great deal to reduce congestion when trains passed through town.
In 1985, complete ownership and operation of Ontario International Airport was transferred to the City of Los Angeles, who also assumed all outstanding debts. The British Conqueror touched down a year later, to the delight of Ontario spectators.
Let's have a big party at your place. So British Airways and Cunard Lines and Toluca Travel put together the brainchild of having the Concorde come to Southern California and said, we're going to throw the party at Ontario International Airport.
Also in 1985, the California Commerce Center received status as a foreign trade zone. This enabled businesses situated there to import goods and resources duty-free.
More than 100 years after E.P. Clark published his Ontario record to the howling of coyotes, residents of Ontario received another new paper. On the morning of April 30th, 1990, the Inland Valley Daily Bulletin replaced the Daily Report.
The United Hispanic Chamber of Commerce was formed in November of 1990 by a group of merchants interested in the enhancement of the business community in Ontario.
One of the purposes of the Chamber is to unite and help the business community to develop and better understand the needs of the community as a whole. The future role of the United Hispanic Chamber of Commerce is very important because 48% of the population in the city of Ontario is Hispanic.
One of our goals is to promote the commercial, industrial, and civic welfare of all people of Ontario to preserve our heritage.
From the time the Chaffee brothers carved a model colony out of a morass of sagebrush and sand, and Charles Frankish transformed it into a thriving city using a little wisdom and a lot of water, Ontario has faced its challenges with determination and vision. In the last 100 years, the people of Ontario have moved as straight as the rows of trees lining Euclid Avenue to overcome their obstacles.
The next 100 years will bring new difficulties and more challenges. The people of Ontario must be prepared to meet them face to face with renewed vision and unlimited energy. Ontario, the child of the desert, the pride of the desert, and the conqueror of the desert must not fail.